Everyone okay?
Yes. Let's move.
You guys are pretty good at this stuff.
It's called luck. And it is gonna run out.
There's no accounting for taste. In the deepest depths of the bowels of the internet, I hear this phrase a lot. There's no accounting for taste. But there are two ways to look at this expression. As a rationalization for disagreeing with something, and as a justification for having an offensive opinion to shield yourself from criticism. But it's always important to point out the successes in something you hate, just as much as the faults in something you love. So when The Last of Us Part 2 comes out, a highly anticipated sequel to the much-beloved, undoubtedly AAA ruiningly influential classic that is The Last of Us, you can understand that people have strong tastes. Depending on what you expected, you might have already polarized yourself for or against this game. But no matter what you believe, it's still important to acknowledge its triumphs and its failures. Here's the thing about The Last of Us Part 2. I like this game. But it's not going to stop me from crapping on it. There's a reason why sites like Metacritic use aggregate scores instead of singular entries. It gives you a wider perspective of the inane opinions of the internet as a whole. Although that perspective might be one of 1,000 kindergartners screaming while they crap their pants. But if you plan on listening to me, you should know a few things about me first. For instance, I'm terrible at shooting games. Walking simulators make me gag, and forced stealth sequences give me so much anxiety I literally save scum after every stealth kill. By all accounts, I should hate this game on principle alone. I didn't even purchase The Last of Us Part 1. I got the remastered version free with my PS4. But sometimes there are games in a genre that are so outrageously iconic that you can't not play them. Even if you don't like the genre, you can still understand why people enjoy them just by looking at the best ones. And for the pseudo-survival horror stealth shooter genre, that's The Last of Us Part 1. So if you want to know if The Last of Us Part 2 is a quality production, you can start by just using your eyes. I mean, look at this game. 5 interns probably died during the development process. Like, this game could be a static shot of Ellie eating dirt for 15 hours, and IGN would probably still give it a 10 for breaking new ground. No one can dispute the raw sweat and detail that have gone into a game like this, and by virtue alone that makes it very impressive. That being said, I'm not a 5-year-old who's entertained by a bundle of shiny keys being jangled noisily in front of me. I am a 28-year-old man who is entertained by a bundle of shiny keys being jangled noisily in front of me. The Last of Us Part 2 maintains the same gameplay structure as Part 1, tweaking and improving it as any sequel should, but there are certain design qualities with it that don't quite compare to the first. Naughty Dog's trademark, landmark storytelling game design works exceedingly well at keeping the player focused and constantly moving towards their next goal. You know, it's that thing where a character will point to something on the horizon and go, "Hey, there's that building we gotta get to." But the design begins to crack under increasingly contrived situations that cause characters to make questionable decisions in order to continue the plot. There's phenomenal writing in The Last of Us Part 2, which is why seeing occasional lapses in the dialogue and character decisions becomes so frustrating. How did Ellie get out of the hospital? Why did we run into the active war zone instead of back the way we came? Where did the horde chasing Joel? Why did we go over the buildings if we could have just taken it? Was Dina imaginary the whole time? How did that dude walk off getting shot in the face? Kill people with her spit? Pacing is the largest singular change to The Last of Us Part 2. Sections of the game that would have been the focus of Part 1, such as the trip from Jackson to Seattle, are skipped in order to keep the story quick and to the point. But the plot also experiments with non-linear storytelling, using flashbacks and time jumps to give you some fun time to pal around with the old characters. But the more time The Last of Us Part 2 stops to rewind, the more difficult it can become to stay invested in the wider plot. For what fun they can be, the flashbacks often end up serving as large drops of exposition at the end of each sequence, where what little gameplay you have almost feels like a second thought. The most egregious of these occurs halfway through the story. Just as the narrative is building up to a final confrontation, the plot comes to a screeching halt as it starts over, denying the player a chance for resolution for another 18 chapters.
Talk about blue balls.
Ironically, the only section that doesn't suffer from gratuitous flashbacks is the final sequence near the end of the game, a legitimately gut-wrenching, blood-soaked, exhaustive endurance test that pits you against some of the most densely packed encounters in the game. But even then, I can't help but feel as though the game could have ended about 4 hours earlier. As it stands, the finale of The Last of Us Part 2 is like a band playing an encore for a crowd that already started leaving. Thematically appropriate, but a bit empty.
Now that I think about it, is there anyone who didn't kill Abby intentionally at any point?
But, issues with pacing aside, this game plays incredibly. Don't get me wrong, if you didn't like the first game's combat, this isn't gonna win you over, but the improvements are palpable. The excessively gory, immensely satisfying death romp that is the core gameplay loop, pulse-pounding, player-measured stealth combat, leisurely scavenging and resource management, is now punctuated by wonderful roaming diegetic encounters, each with their own unique culture, language, and tone based on the area the player finds themselves in. New gameplay mechanics add welcome variety to options in combat, including prone stealth, silencers, the ability to break every piece of glass in the game.
It is impossible to explain how much I enjoy smashing glass in this game.
And a bunch of new abilities and crafting recipes to add to your goo goo gaga one-woman walking arsenal.
Also those black magic rope mechanics. Do you remember what I said before about interns dying?
It's nothing outrageously different from the first game, but all the little additions and tweaks really give you the opportunity to just murder the hell out of people. God, that is violent.
But very fun.
Special credit goes to the accessibility options and modular difficulties, which are so staggeringly diverse, I actually can't believe it. Genuinely really impressive.
Oh, do yourself a favor, go into the options and turn on auto scavenge. No idea why it's not on by default. It'll save you a mountain of button presses.
There is a slightly weird overtone with the gameplay. Almost like the game wants you to feel bad for engaging in the ultra-satisfying combat. I mean, there's story examples, but for instance, whenever you kill someone, if another person sees the body, they'll go, "No! Insert name here!" But because this happens almost every time, I couldn't help but find the juxtaposition hilarious. Like, the better the guns feel, the more tonally outrageous the manslaughter becomes. There's this weird, all-encompassing feeling like whoever designed the combat didn't know that the story is ostensibly about how bad violence is.
It's also possible that I'm just a terrible person.
The plot in The Last of Us Part 2 is, at its heart, a character study, choosing to focus on two characters. Ellie, the protagonist from the previous game and her self-damaging descent into revenge, and a new character, Abby, a tragic but unrepentant murderer and her slow ascent from the horrors of her despicable actions. The characters in The Last of Us Part 2 are encapsulated by the gray morality that is consistent from the first game. Part 1, which starts relatively ambiguous in tone, spends its story slowly building our main characters up to move past their faults, and at least try to give a good rationale for all the despicable things they do, often by putting them in situations where they're fighting back against aggressors. Even the few times we see smidges of humanity from enemies, they're usually sandwiched between opportunistic brutality and cannibalism.
Hey, that's another point for part 2. Got sandwiches in it. What? Who doesn't like sandwiches?
Part 2, then, takes the opposite approach. It takes the endpoint from the first game, starting in a peaceful, idyllic paradise, and descending into abject misery. Over time, the characters become increasingly frenzied, obsessed, and psychologically damaged, almost to a schizophrenic degree. The nature of the killing in The Last of Us Part 2 is spiteful and antagonistic, something the game hammers home by framing your enemies as normal people fighting out of necessity.
Except the Seraphites. Those dudes are just wackadoo nature cultists.
In short, no one in this story gets anything without sacrificing something in return. And it's undeniable that this direction is going to be unsatisfying to people who enjoyed the brighter outlook from the first game. The simple fact is, many people who buy The Last of Us Part 2 are going to be looking for more fun-time adventures with Ellie and Joel. And if you're one of those people, this game may be disappointing just on principle. Fans of the original game may find themselves either outraged or intrigued by the decision to focus on multiple perspectives that are basically completely separate stories.
Abby and Ellie have scenes with each other exactly 3 times.
And that split may only further widen depending on how much you like these characters after seeing them slowly devolve into obsessive lunacy. But if you're a person bathing in the memes made by The Last of Us Part 2, you probably won't be interested in the journey in the first place. There's also something to be said about the violence, as there is a noticeable increase in gore when compared to the first game, especially when the overall darker tone of The Last of Us Part 2 often portrays the technically dazzling carnage as cruel, excessive, and downright heartless.
This game's kind of a bummer.
And if it bothers you to see Ellie and every man, woman, and dog within a 10-foot stabbing radius suffer a slow, knife-to-the-heart Saving Private Ryan-esque suffering, this game may be one to avoid. That being said, if you've played Part 1, you probably already know what you're getting into.
Unless you're one of those maniacs who start a series on a sequel.
But ultimately, due to its continued blend of phenomenal game feel, masterclass technical design, but divisive narrative risks, should you play The Last of Us Part 2, Death of the Author? Sure. Why not? God forbid, you might even have fun.